Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, or you've been following along, today's video is something special. We're finally bringing together all the parts from our deep dive into the world of jump scares, now in one complete video essay. Now you may notice that the audio quality sounds a bit different. That's correct, because I've upgraded to a new microphone. So hopefully everything is coming through crisp and clear. While I've kept the core content the same, I'll be narrating everything with fresh vocals to bring it all together. In this video, we'll cover everything we talked about in the series, from the history of jump scares to how technology has shaped them, to the psychological tricks filmmakers and game developers use to manipulate their emotions. We'll also break down overused cliches and talk about why these cheap tactics are so prevalent in media. So sit back, grab some popcorn, and listen to this video essay in new microphone qualities. Jump scares are a staple in horror movies, TV shows, video games, and even paranormal videos. They're designed to make you jump out of your seat, to get your heart racing, and to leave a lasting impression that, on the surface, feels like fear. But here's the thing, are jump scares really effective, or are they just a cheap trick used by creators to elicit a quick reaction without having to build genuine suspense or terror? The purpose of this video is to dive deep into the world of jump scares, analyzing whether they truly serve an effective tool in horror and suspense, or if they're just a lazy shortcut that cheapens the experience. We'll be exploring not just the mechanics of how jump scares work, but why they're so prevalent, or whether they actually add value to the stories that they're part of. By the end of this video, I hope to provide you with a more critical lens through which to view jump scares, helping you see when they're being used effectively and when they're just being used as a crutch. Now, I'm not here to argue that all jump scares are bad. In fact, when used sparingly and with intention, a well-timed jump scare can be incredibly effective. It can serve as a punctuation mark in a scene, shocking the audience at just the right moment to amplify tension that's already been built. But too often, jump scares are overused and underwhelming, relying on loud noises, sudden movements, or quick cuts to jolt the audience without any real substance behind them. This over-reliance on jump scares can dilute their impact, turning what would be a moment of genuine fear into something that feels cheap and unearned. One of the biggest issues with jump scares is that they're a form of what I like to call fear manipulation. They don't scare you in a deep psychological sense. They scare you in a purely physiological sense. Your body's natural response to a sudden loud noise or a quick movement in your peripheral vision is to flinch, to tense up, and to experience a spike in adrenaline. This is a survival mechanism, hardwired into our brains to help us react quickly to potential threats. But just because something makes you jump doesn't mean it's truly frightening. It's a temporary surface-level reaction that doesn't necessarily leave you with a lingering sense of dread or unease. The kind of fear that really stays with you after the lights come back on. Another problem with jump scares is that they can be incredibly predictable. Once you've seen enough horror movies or played enough scary video games, you start to recognize the patterns. The music drops to a low hum, the camera angle changes to a tight close-up. The character is slowly approaching a door or turning a corner, and you just know something's going to pop out. This predictability can actually undermine the effectiveness of a jump scare, because instead of being caught off guard, you're sitting there, bracing yourself, waiting for it to happen. And when it finally does, instead of feeling a rush of fear, you might just feel a sense of relief that it's over, or even a bit of frustration about how formulaic it all feels. The overuse of jump scares can also detract from the storytelling. When a movie or game relies too heavily on jump scares, it can feel like the creators are using them as a shortcut, instead of taking the time to build tension, atmosphere, and character development. A truly scary scene doesn't need a jump scare to be effective. It can be terrifying simply because of the mood that's been established, the stakes that have been raised, and the connection you feel with the characters. When you care about the characters and understand the world that they're in, even a subtle, quiet moment can be filled with dread. But when a jump scare is thrown in just for the sake of it, it can feel cheap and out of place, breaking the immersion and pulling you out of the story.
Hi, welcome to Chili's.
Jump scares may feel like a modern invention, especially with today's advanced special effects and sound design, but their roots go back much further than most people realize. In fact, the concept of a jump scare has been part of cinema almost since the beginning. Early filmmakers quickly recognized the potential of film as a medium to startle and surprise audiences, even in the silent film era where they didn't have the luxury of sound to enhance the effect. In early cinema, jump scares were created primarily through clever editing and visual surprises. Without sound, filmmakers had to rely on the visual impact to startle their audiences. One of the earliest examples comes from the 1925 film The Phantom of the Opera, starring Lon Chaney. There's a famous scene where the Phantom's mask is removed, revealing his ghastly, disfigured face. The sudden cut to this horrifying image was enough to cause the audiences to jump in their seats. A silent era jump scare, if you will. A later example is The Cat and the Canary, 1927. A silent horror comedy film directed by Paul Laney. The film is filled with sudden visual shocks designed to unnerve the audience. In one scene, while one of the main characters are resting in bed, an unnerving hand reaches out from behind a curtain to snatch a necklace off the actress. And while this doesn't stand to the standards that we have these days, that was in essence one of the earliest jump scares. Even though these films didn't have sound, they effectively utilized the visual language of cinema to create startling moments. The lack of sound actually forced directors to be more creative with their use of lighting, makeup, and editing to achieve the same effect that modern filmmakers might rely on sound for. For instance, sudden changes in lighting, like a flash of light revealing something creepy in the shadows, or a quick, unexpected cut to a disturbing image, were techniques that could deliver a similar shock to the audience. These early jump scares were often tied to the gothic and horror themes popular in silent films, which focused heavily on creating an eerie atmosphere. Because the medium was still new, audiences were more easily startled by these visual tricks, and filmmakers quickly learned to exploit that. Another key factor in the effectiveness of jump scares during this period was the element of surprise in an era where audiences were much less familiar with cinema techniques. Without the tropes and patterns that modern viewers have come to expect, early filmgoers were much more susceptible to being genuinely shocked by a sudden, unexpected image. As sound entered the picture with the advent of talkies, jump scares would become even more sophisticated and impactful. But the foundation was laid during the silent era. These early examples demonstrate that even in the absence of sound, the fundamental principles of the jump scare, timing, surprise, and visual shock, were already being effectively used to startle and engage audiences. The arrival of sound in cinema marked a major turning point in the evolution of the jump scare. Suddenly, filmmakers had a new tool to manipulate and startle their audiences: sound. The early talkies were quick to exploit this, using sudden loud noises, unexpected dialogue, or eerie music cues to create moments of shock. Originally in this video essay, I detailed that the 1931 film Dracula starring Bela Lugosi had eerie silence, musical stings, and Bela Lugosi's haunting presence. In reality, 1990s was when Dracula first got its orchestra, so not exactly the best example. The advent of sound was also used for the development of what we now recognize as the classic sting, a sudden burst of music or sound that accompanies a jump scare. This technique would become a staple in horror cinema, adding an auditory layer to the visual shock that had been the sole domain of silent films. During the golden age of horror, jump scares became more refined and integral to the storytelling process. Films like Frankenstein and The Wolfman used sound and visual surprises to build tension and deliver frights. In these films, the jump scare often served as a climactic moment, releasing the tension that had been building up through the use of suspenseful music and atmospheric settings. The 1950s saw the rise of the monster movie, where jump scares were used to introduce creatures or to punctuate moments of terror. For example, films like The Creature from the Black Lagoon from 1954 made effective use of the sudden appearances by the titular creature, often accompanied by a dramatic musical sting to jolt the audience. The 1960s and 1970s brought a new level of sophistication to the jump scare era as films began to explore psychological horror and more intense visceral forms of fear. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho in the 1960s is a prime example of this evolution. The infamous shower scene is not just a jump scare, but a masterclass in building tension and using editing, sound, and framing to create an unforgettable moment of shock. The suddenness of the attack, combined with the screeching violin of Bernard Herrmann's score, epitomizes the jump scare as a tool for maximum impact. Unfortunately, the audio that I could have put in this video is copyright all the way out until 2055. Shame. The 1970s also saw the rise of the slasher genre, which would heavily rely on jump scares to keep audiences on edge. Films like Halloween from 1978 and Friday the 13th #2 popularized the use of a false scare, where the tension builds, the music crescendos, but the scare turns out to be something benign. This bait-and-switch technique became the hallmark of the genre, creating a roller coaster of tension and release that audiences came to expect. With the advent of digital technology and CGI in the 1990s, jump scares became even more elaborate. Filmmakers could now create more realistic and terrifying monsters, ghosts, and other entities to pop out at the audience. Movies like The Ring from 2002 and Paranormal Activity 2007 took advantage of these advancements, using jump scares not as isolated moments, but as the central elements of their narrative structure. In the current era, jump scares have become so ingrained in horror that they are sometimes criticized by being overused or predictable. However, when used effectively, like in It Follows from 2014, or Hereditary from 2018, they can still serve powerful moments of fear that resonate with audiences. These films often subvert expectations, using jump scares in more subtle and psychologically disturbing ways, proving that even in an era of CGI and digital effects, the basic principles of timing, surprise, and tension remain the core of a successful jump scare. Throughout these different eras, the jump scare has remained a versatile and enduring tool in the horror genre. While the techniques and technologies may have changed, the underlying goal, to startle and scare the audience, has remained the same. Whether through the simple shock of a sudden image in a silent film or the complex multisensory experience of a modern horror movie, the jump scare continues to evolve, adapting to new mediums and audience expectations. Technology has played a crucial role in the shaping and use of the effectiveness of jump scares throughout the history of film and television. From the introduction of synchronized sound to the rise of digital effects and immersive audio, technological advancements have consistently provided filmmakers with new tools to startle and scare audiences. These innovations have not only enhanced the impact of jump scares, but have also allowed for greater creativity and variety in their execution. The introduction of synchronized sound in the late 1920s revolutionized the way jump scares were delivered. Before sound, silent films relied solely on visual cues and editing techniques to create moments of shock. However, the addition of sound opened up a whole new dimension for filmmakers to explore. Sudden loud noises, eerie music cues, and the unexpected dialogue could now be used to jolt the audience, making jump scares a more multi-sensory experience. One of the most iconic uses of sound in the early jump scares is the sting, a sudden burst of music or sound that accompanies a shocking visual. This technique quickly became a staple in horror films, as it allowed filmmakers to manipulate the audience's emotions more directly. The combination of visual surprise and auditory shock created a more intense and immersive experience, making scares more effective and memorable. As special effects technology advanced, so too did the possibility for creating more elaborate and terrifying jump scares. Practical effects, such as animatronics and prosthetics and makeup, allowed filmmakers to bring monsters, ghouls, and other creatures to life in ways that were previously unimaginable. These effects could be used to create sudden, realistic appearances that would shock and horrify audiences. For example, the use of practical effects in films like An American Werewolf in London from 1981, and The Thing from 1982 led to some of the most memorable jump scares in horror history. The realism of the creatures and the shock of their sudden appearances were made possible by the advancements in practical effects, which gave filmmakers the tools to create more convincing and terrifying scares. The advent of computer-generated imagery, or CGI, in the 1990s marked another significant leap in the evolution of jump scares. CGI allowed for the creation of more complex and visually stunning scares that could not have been achieved with practical effects alone. Ghosts, demons, and other supernatural entities could now be rendered with a high level of detail and fluidity that made their sudden appearances even more startling. The ability to seamlessly integrate these digital entities into live-action footage gave filmmakers a greater flexibility in crafting scares that were both surprising and visually impressive. The development of surround sound and immersive audio technologies has also had a profound impact on the effectiveness of jump scares. These advancements allow filmmakers to place sounds in specific locations within the auditory space. Sounds can now come from behind, above, or to the side, catching viewers off guard and heightening the sense of immersion. This use of directional sound is particularly effective in jump scares as it makes audience feel like the sources of the scare are coming from right beside them. The Conjuring from 2013 expertly used this immersive audio to create jump scares that felt more immediate and personal, adding an extra layer of tension and fear. The transition to high definition HD and the use of 3D technology have also influenced the way jump scares are crafted. HD allows for greater clarity in detail and in the visuals, making sudden appearances more striking and realistic. Audiences can now see every detail of a creature's face or a ghostly figure's movement. Advancements in editing software and post-production techniques have also played a significant role in the evolution of jump scares. Filmmakers can now manipulate footage in ways that were not possible in the past, obviously, allowing for more precise timing and execution of scares. Digital editing tools enable filmmakers to craft jump scares with perfect timing, ensuring that the scare lands exactly at the right moment for maximum impact. Post-production effects, such as the digital enhancements, color grading, and sound design, can be used to heighten the intensity of a jump scare. For example, a scene might be darkened or desaturated to create a more ominous atmosphere, or a sound effect might be amplified to make the scare more jarring. In conclusion, technological advancements have played a pivotal role in shaping the evolution of jump scares. From the introduction of sound to the rise of CGI and immersive audio, each new development has provided filmmakers with new tools to create a more effective and terrifying scare. As technology continues to advance, we can expect jump scares to evolve further, finding new ways to surprise and scare audiences in increasingly sophisticated and immersive ways. Jump scares are one of the most effective and widely used techniques in horror media, designed to elicit an immediate, intense reaction from the audience. The core of their effectiveness is a deep understanding of human psychology, particularly how our brains process surprise and fear. The foundation of any jump scare is the startle response, a reflexive reaction that is hardwired into our brain when we are suddenly confronted with an unexpected stimulus, like a loud noise, a sudden movement, or a flash of light. Our bodies instinctively react. When something unexpected happens, our brains immediately assess the situation to determine if we are in danger, triggering a cascade of physiological responses designed to prepare us for action. When a jump scare occurs, it taps directly into this startle reflex. The suddenness of the stimulus catches us off guard, causing our bodies to react before our conscious minds can fully process what's happening. Our hearts race, our muscles tense, and adrenaline floods our system. This automatic, visceral response is what makes jump scares so effective. They bypass our rational minds and hit us directly on an instinctual level. Surprise is a key component of fear, particularly in the context of jump scares. Our brains are constantly predicting what will happen next based on the information that we have. Jump scares are particularly effective at exploiting this element of surprise because they often occur when we least expect them. A quiet scene, a slow buildup of tension, or a moment of apparent calm can suddenly be shattered by a loud noise or a sudden appearance. This subversion of expectation amplifies the fear response, as our brains struggle to reconcile the sudden change in circumstances. While the element of surprise is crucial, anticipation also plays a significant role in the effectiveness of jump scares. Filmmakers often build tension in the moments leading up to a jump scare, creating a sense of unease or dread in the audience. The anticipation primes us for a scare, heightening our sensitivity to any stimuli. The longer the anticipation is drawn out, the more intense the eventual scare becomes. This tension building can be achieved through a variety of techniques, such as eerie music, lingering camera shots, or the absence of sound altogether. As the audience becomes more and more aware that something is about to happen, their anxiety levels increase. The release of this built-up tension results in an even more powerful reaction. Our brains are constantly trying to predict what will happen next, and when those predictions are proven wrong, it creates a jarring and unsettling experience. Jump scares often work by setting up certain expectations and then abruptly subverting it. For example, a scene might lead the audience to believe that a scare is about to happen, only to deliver a false alarm. This technique, known as the fake-out, lulls the audience into a false sense of security. Just when they think it's safe, the real scare occurs, catching them off guard and making the impact even more intense. This violation of expectation can be particularly effective in horror, where unpredictability is a key element in maintaining tension and fear. Conditioning also plays a role in how we respond to jump scares. Over time, repeated exposure to jump scares can condition us to expect them in certain contexts. For example, if we've seen enough horror movies, we might start to anticipate a jump scare every time a character opens a door or looks into a mirror. This conditioning creates a heightened state of alertness, which can make the eventual scare even more effective. However, this can also lead to desensitization if the jump scares are overused. When we become too familiar with the patterns and techniques used to create jump scares, they lose their impact. Instead of feeling genuinely frightened, we might start to feel bored or frustrated, especially if we feel that the scares are predictable or cheap. This is why successful horror films and games often vary their approach to jump scares, keeping the audience on edge by subverting their expectations and introducing new elements of surprise. Finally, jump scares tap into a more primal aspect of fear, the fear of the unknown. When something sudden and unexpected happens, especially in a dark or ambiguous setting, our imaginations can run wild. In the split second after a jump scare, our brains are scrambling to make sense of what just happened. This uncertainty can amplify fear as we struggle to process whether we are truly in danger or if the scare was just a false alarm. This is why jump scares are often more effective when they are followed by a moment of uncertainty or ambiguity. The brain is left questioning what just happened, prolonging the fear and creating a lingering sense of unease. In this way, jump scares not only startle us in the moment, but also leave a lasting impact as our minds continue to grapple with the unknown. In conclusion, the psychological mechanisms behind jump scares, surprise, anticipation, violation of expectation, conditioning, and the fear of the unknown, work together to create a powerful and immediate response in the audience. By tapping into our primal instincts and exploiting our natural responses to unexpected stimuli, jump scares are often able to elicit intense fear and shock, making them one of the most effective tools in the horror genre. However, their effectiveness also depends on how they are used. When done well, they can be terrifyingly highlighting. But when overused and poorly executed, they can quickly lose their impact. As viewers, we are constantly trying to predict what will happen next in a story. This is a natural part about how our brains process information. We take in visual and auditory cues, recall similar situations from past experiences, and form expectations about what's likely to happen. Filmmakers and game designers are well aware of the tendency and often use it to their advantage by setting up scenes in ways that lead the audience to anticipate a certain outcome. In horror, this expectation is usually tied to the tension and suspense that precede a potential scare. For example, a character might be exploring a dark, abandoned house with a flashlight. The music might become tense, or the camera might linger on a seemingly innocuous door. These cues signal to the audience that something is about to happen, building their anticipation and, with it, their anxiety. This build-up is crucial because it primes the audience for the scare, making the eventual release of tension all the more powerful. What makes jump scares truly effective is how often they subvert or violate these carefully built expectations. The scare doesn't just meet the audience's expectations, it shatters them, catching them off guard and amplifying their emotional response. One of the most common ways that jump scares achieve this is by delaying the scare or placing it in an unexpected moment. For instance, a scene might create a situation where the audience is certain a jump scare is coming. Perhaps a character is opening a creaky door or looking into a dark mirror, but then nothing happens. This moment of expectation is deliberately stretched out, often leading to a sense of relief or even frustration when the scare doesn't materialize. Just when the audience starts to think that they've been tricked, the real scare hits, often in an entirely different and unexpected moment, making it far more startling. When the scare does come, it feels even more intense because it disrupts the audience's sense of security. They thought they knew it was coming, but they were wrong. Another common tactic is the use of the fake-out scares. These are common moments that appear to be building up to a jump scare that end up being benign. For example, a character might open a door suddenly and the audience braces for a scare, only to find that it's either a harmless cat or nothing at all. This plays with the audience's expectations in a way that keeps them on edge, making them more susceptible to the next scare. The genius of fake-outs is that they condition the audience to expect a scare at every turn, which can make the actual jump scares even more effective. By keeping the audience guessing about when and where the scare will happen, the filmmakers or game designers maintain a high level of tension and unpredictability. This unpredictability is key to maintaining the effectiveness of jump scares over the course of a film or game. If the audience always knows when a scare is coming, it loses its power. Another way jump scares exploit and violate audience expectations is through the repetition and escalation. A single jump scare can be effective, but when used repeatedly, jump scares can create a sense of dread that builds over time. Each scare violates the audience's expectations in a new way, making them increasingly unsure of when the next scare will come. For example, a film might use a series of jump scares, each one escalating in intensity. The first scare might be relatively mild, but each subsequent scare becomes more and more startling, or happens in increasingly unexpected ways. This escalation does not only keep the audience engaged, but it also makes each scare feel more impactful than the last. The repeated violation of expectations creates a psychological pattern where the audience is constantly on edge, never able to fully relax or predict what will happen next. Jump scares are most effective when the environment or context they occur in is unpredictable. If the audience can't predict when or where the scare will happen, the fear of the unknown becomes a powerful tool. This unpredictability is often achieved through the clever use of editing, sound design, and pacing. For example, a quiet scene might be suddenly interrupted by a loud noise, or a peaceful moment might be shattered by a sudden movement. This unpredictability keeps the audience constantly on alert, making them more susceptible to the jump scares when it finally occurs. It's the violation of the safe, predictable, patterned environment that makes the scare so much more impactful. The audience's expectations are not just met, but they're turned upside down, creating a powerful emotional response. To understand how desensitization occurs, it's important to first look at the concept of conditioning. Particularly in the context of horror, conditioning refers to the process in which an audience learns to associate certain cues, like eerie music, a character's cautious behavior, or sudden silence, with an impending jump scare. These cues serve as a signal that primes the audience for the scare, building tension and anticipation along the way. Initially, this conditioning is highly effective when a jump scare is well executed. It capitalizes on the audience's heightened state of alertness, delivering a shock that feels intense and visceral. The first few times this happens, the effect can be powerful, creating a memorable and frightening experience. However, as the audience becomes more familiar with the patterns, the conditioning begins to lose its potency. Repetition is a key factor in the desensitization process. In many horror movies and games, jump scares are used repeatedly throughout the narrative, often following a predictable formula. For example, the camera might linger on a dark hallway, the music might become ominous, and the character might slowly approach a door. The audience, having seen similar setups before, know that the jump scare is likely coming. While this familiarity can initially heighten tension, making the audience brace themselves for the scare, it also reduces the impact of the scare itself. When the scare becomes too predictable, the audience may start to anticipate them well in advance, dulling the shock value. The more frequently this pattern is repeated, the less effective each subsequent scare becomes. Over time, the audience might become so accustomed to the formula that they no longer feel any sense of fear or surprise. Desensitization can manifest in several ways. Some viewers might become numb to the scares, experiencing little to no emotional reaction when a jump scare occurs, and others might even start to find the scares irritating or annoying, particularly if they feel that the scares are being used in a lazy or formulaic way. Instead of feeling frightened, the audience might roll their eyes or sigh, having become too familiar with the techniques being employed. This desensitization doesn't affect how individual jump scares work, but it does diminish the overall effectiveness of a horror film, show, or game. When the audience is too accustomed to jump scares, the atmosphere of tension and dread that the creators are trying to build is effectively undermined. The scares no longer feel like genuine threats, but rather predictable and shallow tricks, reducing emotional engagement and immersion of the experience. The overuse of jump scares and the resulting desensitization can have broader implications for the horror genre as a whole. As the audience becomes increasingly desensitized to jump scares, creators might find it more challenging to elicit fear using traditional methods. This can lead to the reliance on even more extreme or shocking content in an attempt to break through the desensitization barrier, potentially leading to a cycle of diminishing returns. In some cases, this might push creators to explore new and innovative ways of creating fear, moving away from jump scares and towards more psychological or atmospheric horror. However, it can also lead to a stagnation in the genre, where the same tired techniques are recycled over and over and over again, failing to truly engage or terrify the audience. For creators who want to avoid desensitizing their audience, it's important to use jump scares sparingly and thoughtfully. Rather than relying on predictable formulas, they can mix up the timing, placement, and execution of jump scares to keep the audience on their toes. By subverting expectations and introducing genuine uncertainty, they can maintain the effectiveness of jump scares without falling into the trap of repetition. Additionally, creators can focus on building strong atmosphere, developing characters, and crafting a compelling narrative that doesn't rely solely on jump scares to create fear. By using jump scares as a tool rather than a crutch, they can keep the audience engaged and preserve emotional impact of their work. Desensitization to jump scares is a real phenomena that can undermine the effectiveness of horror movies, TV shows, and games. Through repeated exposure and predictable patterns, audiences can become conditioned to expect jump scares, reducing their emotional impact and leading to a sense of boredom or irritation. To avoid this, creators will need to be mindful of how they use jump scares, ensuring that they remain powerful and effective tools rather than cheap and overused gimmicks. By breaking the cycle of repetition and exploring new ways to scare their audience, they can keep the horror genre fresh, exciting, and genuinely terrifying. Ghost hunting shows and documentaries have gained significant popularity over the years, drawing in audiences with the promise of real-life paranormal encounters and spine-chilling moments. However, a critical examination of these shows reveals that many of the so-called scares are not genuinely paranormal, but are instead the result of cleverly timed jump scares designed to manipulate the audience's emotions. Today, we're going even deeper, so let's just jump right in. These tactics often rely on the anticipation of fear rather than any actual evidence of the supernatural, which can undermine the credibility of the content. One of the key ways that jump scares are utilized in ghost hunting shows is through the careful build-up of tension. These shows often feature long sequences where the hosts explore dark, abandoned buildings or purportedly haunted locations. The atmosphere is intentionally eerie, with dim lighting, creaking floorboards, and ominous music creating a sense of dread. This setup primes the audience to expect something terrifying to happen at any moment. Throughout these segments, the host will often react to small, inconsequential noises.
What was that?
As if they're significant paranormal events. These reactions serve to heighten the tension, making the audience believe that a ghostly encounter is imminent. However, in many cases, the noises are either mundane or intentionally created by the production team for the purpose of suspense. When a jump scare finally occurs, it's often sudden and loud.
That was very fast.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and bring out this device.
Dude, that sounds like someone's up there just pacing around.
Yeah. Airplane mode.
For example, a loud noise might erupt out of nowhere, accompanied by frantic reactions from the hosts.
Hello! Guys, that was around the corner.
These scares are typically fleeting, offering little to no follow-up or explanation, leaving the audience to wonder that what they saw or heard was genuinely paranormal or just a well-timed trick.
Buried?
In many ghost hunting shows, these jump scares are strategically placed at regular intervals to maintain the audience's interest. However, upon closer inspection, it becomes clear that these moments are often devoid of any real investigative substance. Instead of providing compelling evidence of ghosts or the supernatural, the shows rely on the element of surprise to create a momentary thrill. The overuse of jump scares in ghost hunting shows can have a negative impact on the credibility of the content. When the focus is on creating cheap thrills rather than conducting thorough investigations, the audience might begin to question the authenticity of the paranormal claims being made. The reliance on jump scares can make it seem as though the show is more interested in entertainment than in serious exploration of the supernatural. Moreover, these tactics tend to lead to a sense of distrust amongst viewers. If the audience feels like they're being manipulated into feeling scared rather than being presented with genuine evidence, they might start to doubt the legitimacy of the entire show. This skepticism can extend beyond the individual show to the broader genre of ghost hunting content, undermining the credibility of the more serious investigations. Editing and sound design play a crucial role in creating jump scares in a ghost hunting show. In many cases, the scare is amplified by sudden cuts, quick zooms, or jarring sound effects that are added in post-production. These elements are designed to catch the audience off guard, creating a momentary shock that would be mistaken for genuine fear. Sound design, in particular, is a powerful tool in ghost hunting shows. The use of eerie background music, sudden loud noises, and distorted audio can all contribute to the sense of unease and anticipation that precedes a jump scare. However, this reliance on sound effects can also detract from the authenticity of the investigation. When a scare is more about the sound design than the actual content, it raises questions about the validity of the paranormal evidence that's being shown. So while jump scares can be an effective tool for creating suspense and excitement in ghost hunting shows, they can also come with significant drawbacks. When overused or poorly executed, they can undermine the credibility of the content and lead to audience skepticism. For ghost hunting shows and documentaries to be taken seriously, it is essential that they focus on providing substantive evidence-based investigations using pretty good technology, rather than relying on cheap thrills to keep the viewers engaged. Ultimately, if your paranormal investigations are for the purpose of entertainment from a theatrical standpoint, jump scares should be used sparingly and with purpose, enhancing the narrative rather than distracting from it. By prioritizing genuine exploration of a paranormal over momentary shocks, ghost hunting content can maintain its appeal while also earning the trust and respect of its audiences. Jump scares have become a staple in horror movies and TV shows, often employed as a quick and easy way to elicit fear from the audience. And while they can be effective when used sparingly and creatively over time, certain tropes and cliches have emerged that make these scares predictable, and in some cases less impactful. Let's explore how some of those common tropes and cliches associated with jump scares in movies and TV shows. One of the most overused jump scare cliches is the sudden noise. Which often comes out of nowhere to startle both the characters and the audience. This could be anything from a door slamming, a phone ringing. The noise is usually much louder than the surrounding sounds, creating a jarring effect that's meant to provoke an immediate reaction of fear or surprise. Now, we touched on this one in the first two parts, but I'm gonna go into a bit of detail in here too, but I'll keep it brief. The fake-out scare, also known as a false scare, is another common trope where the tension is built up, leading the audience to expect a frightening event, only for the scare to be something mundane or harmless, like a cat. Or a friend. A character slowly approaches a closed door, with the camera angle suggesting that something terrifying is waiting on the other side. The character opens the door, and instead of a monster or a ghost, it's just a harmless object or another character standing there. I know, cliche. How about the mirror scare? The mirror scare is a classic horror trope where a character looks into a mirror and upon looking away and then back again, suddenly sees something frightening reflected behind them. This trope plays on the fear of something being in your blind spot, catching both the character and the audience off guard. So a character in a horror movie might be washing their face, brushing their teeth in front of a bathroom mirror. They lean down, and when they straighten up, the reflection reveals a ghostly figure standing behind them, only for it to disappear when they turn around.
Oh, don't be a putz, David.
I know, I crapped my pants too. The quiet bang trope is a structured setup commonly used to create a jump scare. The scene starts off slow and quiet, with minimal sound and deliberate pacing, allowing the tension to build. The audience is lulled into a false sense of security before the scare suddenly hits with a loud noise or a shocking visual. For example, a character might be cautiously exploring a dark basement, with the only sounds being their footsteps and perhaps some faint, eerie background noise. The tension builds over several seconds or even minutes. You might hear a sound effect slowly rising in the background. In the industry, we call that risers. Pretty on the nose. But then you hear bang or wah. A loud or sudden movement happens, delivering the scare. The quiet bang. Pretty cool, huh? Another common jump scare trope is the sudden reveal of the monster or antagonist. Often the scene is set up with the character unaware of the impending danger, and the creature or villain is suddenly revealed, usually accompanied by a loud sound cue. This trope is especially prevalent in horror movies with supernatural or slasher elements. The hand grab trope is another classic, where a character is grabbed by an unseen force, or another character, often at a moment when they believe that they're safe. This scare typically happens in confined spaces, like under a bed, inside a closet, or right through a wall. While these tropes and cliches can be effective in the short term, their overuse has made them predictable, and in some cases less effective. Modern audiences, familiar with the patterns, often see the jump scare coming, which can diminish the impact. For horror to remain truly terrifying, filmmakers and creators need to find new and innovative ways to surprise and scare their audiences without relying on these well-worn tricks. Now this is a part that I'm extremely excited about. We're going to be talking about jump scares in video games. Jump scares in video games have become a popular tool for creating intense moments of fear and surprise. Unlike in movies or TV shows, video games place their player directly in control, making the experience much more immersive and personal. This interactivity amplifies the effect of jump scares, as players are more likely to get caught off guard when they feel directly involved in the action. Let's explore how these scares are used in video game design and their impact on gameplay. One of the key differences between video games and other forms of media is interactivity. In a game, the player's actions and decisions drive the experience, which make jump scares more personal and impactful. When a player is fully engaged, like navigating dark corridors, solving puzzles, managing resources, they're more likely to get caught off guard by a sudden scare. This element of surprise is heightened because players are actively participating in the game, making the scare feel more immediate and real. One specific jump scare comes to mind, and it always comes to mind, especially if you're familiar with genre. In Resident Evil, when the dogs jump through the windows, that caught everyone off guard. It was fantastic. Video games often use jump scares as a tool for building atmosphere and tension. Developers carefully design environments that keep the players on edge, using lighting, sounds, and pacing to create an unsettling mood. The fear of impending jump scares can be just as effective as the scare itself. Players become more anxious and paranoid, anticipating that something could happen at any moment. For example, Silent Hill 2. The game's foggy, desolate environment and eerie sound design create a constant sense of dread. Players move cautiously, knowing that a monster could suddenly appear from the mist, or that radio static could signal an approaching threat, leading to a jump scare. Unlike in movies where the audience is a passive observer, video games give players a sense of agency. This means that when a jump scare happens, the player's reaction can directly influence what the outcome is. For example, if a monster suddenly appears and the player must quickly decide whether to fight, flee, or hide, this urgency can lead to an adrenaline-pumping moment where the jump scare is just the beginning of a larger challenge. In Outlast, players have no weapons but must rely on stealth to survive. When a jump scare occurs, such as the lunatic suddenly appearing in the dark corridor, the player must quickly decide how to escape, heightening the tension and fear. Sound and visual cues play a crucial role in the effectiveness of jump scares in video games. Developers often use audio cues such as loud noises or unsettling music to signal a scare. Similarly, visual elements like a sudden change in lighting, unexpected movements, or the appearance of the monster can create a powerful scare. These elements work together to create an immersive experience that keeps players right on the edge. Like in Dead Space, the game uses sudden noises like the clanging of pipes or the distant roar of a monster to put the players on edge. Coupled with the dim, flickering lights and the sudden appearance of necromorphs, man, these elements create terrifying experiences that rely heavily on jump scares. But there is a caveat. While jump scares can enhance the horror experience, they can also impact gameplay in different ways. For some players, frequent jump scares can lead to anxiety or frustration, especially if they're used excessively or without the proper build-up. However, when used strategically, jump scares can add to the game's challenge, forcing players to stay alert and adapt quickly to unexpected threats. In Five Nights at Freddy's, jump scares are basically the central mechanic. The game's tension comes from managing resources and timing while trying to prevent the animatronic characters from getting too close. When a jump scare happens, it usually means that the player has failed to manage the situation correctly, leading to the game over. This use of jump scares as a gameplay mechanic keeps players on edge and fully engaged. Now, I did play the first one. I haven't really played the other ones. I like to have more control in the movement of my character rather than being in a seated position and just a victim to what's happening. So jump scares can be effective, but they can also detract from the overall storytelling if they're overused. Some games strike a balance by using jump scares sparingly, allowing for more atmospheric horror and psychological tension to build. Others may rely heavily on jump scares, which can sometimes feel cheap and repetitive if not executed well. The challenge for some game developers is to use the jump scares in a way that complements the story and enhances the overall experience without becoming predictable or tiresome. For example, in The Last of Us, jump scares are used sparingly, allowing the game's emotional narrative and character development to take center stage. And when a scare does happen, it feels earned and contributes to the tension, rather than serving as a cheap shock. Jump scares in video games are a powerful tool that when used effectively can create unforgettable moments of fear and tension. The interactivity of games make the scares even more personal and impactful, but the developers must balance their use to avoid the over-reliance on cheap shocks. By integrating jump scares into a gameplay and narrative in meaningful ways, games can provide a horror experience that is both thrilling and immersive. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Welcome to part 4 of our in-depth exploration of jump scares. If you've made it this far, you've seen us break down the history, psychology, and the techniques behind these jolting moments across various media. We've dissected how jump scares evolved, why they work on our brains, and how they've been used, and sometimes abused, in movies, TV, and video games. In this segment, we're going to shift our focus to the impact of these scares. We'll also take a look at the future of jump scares and whether they'll continue to be a staple in horror or fade into the background as audiences become more desensitized. Let's get started. One of the primary impacts of cheap jump scares is their tendency to manipulate a viewer's emotions. A sudden loud noise or a quick visual shock that can easily startle someone, triggering an automatic fight or flight response. This psychological reaction can make it seem like the content is far scarier and more intense than it actually is. However, this manipulation often lacks substance, relying on basic reflex rather than creating a lasting sense of dread or fear. In many low-budget horror films, jump scares are used frequently to keep the audience on edge, but without meaningful context or build-up, they feel shallow and unearned. The audience might jump in their seat, but the scare doesn't linger because it's not tied to any deeper narrative or character development. When jump scares are overused, they lose their effectiveness. Audiences can become desensitized to the tactic, expecting a scare around every corner, which diminishes the overall impact. Instead of being genuinely frightened, viewers might start anticipating the scares, making them less effective and, in some cases, even boring. In some horror video games, constant jump scares can lead players to become numb to the tactic. Instead of feeling fear, they might start to feel irritation or fatigue, knowing that the next scare is just a matter of time. This can detract from the overall experience, making the game feel repetitive and uninspired. Cheap jump scares can also detract from the story and character development. When a piece of horror media relies too heavily on jump scares, it often does so at the expense of a deeper, more meaningful horror. Instead of exploring themes of fear, loss, or the unknown, the content becomes a series of jolts that fail to build a cohesive or compelling narrative. In some horror films, a reliance on jump scares can vastly overshadow the plot, reducing complex characters to mere scare targets. The audience is so focused on bracing for what's next that they miss out on the underlying themes or emotional beats that could have made the story more engaging and memorable. This is the 5th and final part. This is on the future of jump scares. Let's just get started. Jump scares have been a staple in horror media for decades, but their future is increasingly uncertain. As audiences become more savvy and critical of cheap scares, the effectiveness of this once reliable tactic is being called into question. To speculate on the future of jump scares, we need to consider several factors: evolving audience expectations, advancements in technology, and shifts in storytelling techniques. Audiences today are more informed and discerning than ever before. With the rise of online film criticism, social media discussions, and a wealth of horror content available on streaming platforms, viewers have become more aware of the mechanics behind the jump scares. They recognize when they're being manipulated, and predictable setups are less likely to genuinely frighten them. As a result, creators may need to rethink their approach to horror. Jump scares that rely solely on loud noises or sudden movements will lose their impact as audiences demand more sophisticated and immersive experiences. The future of horror may see a shift towards psychological terror, atmospheric tension, and hopefully deeper storytelling, with jump scares being used more sparingly and strategically to enhance rather than dominate the experience. Technology has always played a significant role in the evolution of jump scares, and this will likely continue into the future. Virtual reality and augmented reality are emerging as new frontiers for horror, offering a potential for deeply immersive experiences that go beyond the traditional media. In these environments, jump scares could be more personalized and unpredictable, tailored to an individual player's or viewer's real-time experience. For example, a VR horror game can analyze the player's behavior and reactions to determine the optimal moment to deploy a jump scare, making it far more effective than a pre-scripted event. However, as with traditional media, there's a risk that overuse could lead to desensitization. To maintain their effectiveness, jump scares in these new formats will need to be carefully integrated into a broader context of tension and fear rather than serving as the main attraction. As horror evolves, we may see a greater emphasis on storytelling that doesn't rely on jump scares to create fear. Filmmakers and game designers are increasingly exploring more nuanced and character-driven narratives that build dread through the atmosphere, pacing, and psychological depth. In this context, jump scares might be used more as a punctuation mark, an occasional jolt to heighten tension, rather than the primary method of scaring the audience. This shift could lead to a renaissance of sorts in horror, where the genre moves away from the formulaic use of jump scares toward the more innovative and varied approaches to inducing fear. Filmmakers might draw inspiration from the slow burn horror of the past, where the terror comes from what is implied rather than what is shown outright. In this landscape, jump scares could still have a place, but they would be employed with greater care and purpose. Looking further into the future, artificial intelligence and machine learning could play a role in the evolution of jump scares. Imagine a horror experience that adapts real-time based on the viewer's reactions, using AI to detect when they're most vulnerable or on edge. This technology could create jump scares that are uniquely timed for each individual, making them more effective than ever. However, this also raises the ethical questions about manipulation and consent in horror experiences. If jump scares are tailored to exploit viewers' specific fears and anxieties, there's a risk of crossing boundaries and causing harm. As technology advances, creators will need to consider how to balance the effectiveness with ethical responsibilities. Despite the potential for change, it's likely that the jump scares will never fully disappear from horror media. There's something primal and immediate about the fear they evoke, and when used effectively, they can still provide a thrilling experience. The challenge for the future creators will be finding new ways to keep jump scares fresh and impactful. Perhaps combining them with other forms of horror or using them in unexpected contexts. So in conclusion, while the future of jump scares may involve a shift away from the over-reliance on this tactic, they are unlikely to disappear entirely. As horror continues to evolve, jump scares will need to adapt to the changing audience expectations, technological advancements, and new storytelling techniques. Whether through innovative uses in VR, AI-driven experiences, or as a complementary tool in more sophisticated narratives, jump scares will likely remain a part of horror's toolkit, albeit a more refined and thoughtful form. Let's quickly recap what we've covered in this lengthy video essay about jump scares in horror media. First, we explored the purpose of jump scares, and how they're often used as a quick and easy way to elicit fear. While they can be effective in the moment, they are often criticized for being cheap tactics that don't contribute to deeper storytelling. Next, we looked at the history of jump scares, tracing their origins from early silent films to their evolution through different eras of cinema and television. We discussed how technological advancements like sound and special effects have made jump scares more impactful, but also more predictable. Then we delved into the psychology behind jump scares, explaining how they exploit the element of surprise and violate audience expectations to create fear. We also touched on how repeated use of jump scares can lead to desensitization, making them less effective over time. Moving forward, we examined the use of cheap jump scares in various media, including ghost hunting, videos, movies, TV shows, and video games. We highlighted how the over-reliance on jump scares can manipulate viewers' emotion and distract from the storytelling, ultimately cheapening the experience. And finally, we speculated on the future of jump scares, considering how the evolving audience expectations, advancements in technology like VR and AI, and shifts in storytelling techniques might shape their use in years to come. After breaking down the history, psychology, and the current use of jump scares, it's clear that they're both a powerful tool and a double-edged sword in the world of horror. Jump scares can be incredibly effective in delivering an immediate visceral jolt of fear. They can create an unforgettable moment that leaves you gripping the edge of your seat, heart racing, and adrenaline pumping. In the right hands, a well-timed jump scare can elevate a scene, adding an element of surprise that can perfectly complement the atmosphere of dread and tension that the story has built. However, the overuse and reliance on jump scares can also undermine the very experience they aim to enhance. When filmmakers or creators lean too heavily on them, the impact diminishes, turning what could have been a powerful narrative tool into a predictable and sometimes lazy gimmick. Instead of building lasting experience of fear or unease, overused jump scares can lead to a cheap thrill that fades as quickly as it arrives, leaving audiences more annoyed than afraid. In essence, jump scares work best when they're used sparingly and strategically, as part of a broader arsenal of horror techniques. They should complement the story, not replace it. The most effective horror taps into the deeper psychological fears, building a sense of terror that lingers long after the jump scare has passed. It's the fear of the unknown, the anticipation, and the unsettling atmosphere that truly makes a horror story memorable. As the horror genre continues to evolve, it's important for creators to remember that true fear doesn't just come from what was on the screen, but what's left to the imagination. Jump scares can certainly play a role in that, but they shouldn't be the whole story. By focusing on atmosphere, character development, and psychological depth, horror can continue to push the boundaries and deliver experiences that are genuinely terrifying rather than just momentarily startling. In the end, the effectiveness of a jump scare lies not in the loud bang or a sudden flash, but in the groundwork laid before and after it. When used thoughtfully, a jump scare can be the crescendo of a terrifying sympathy. When overused, it's just noise. Over time, the overuse of cheap jump scares can erode the viewer's trust in the horror genre. If audiences repeatedly encounter media that relies on these tactics without delivering on a deeper scares or a compelling story, they might become cynical or dismissive of new horror content, like me. This can lead to a broader decline in the genre's credibility and its ability to evoke genuine fear. Horror franchises that churn out sequels with diminishing returns often fall into the trap of relying on cheap scares. As a result, long-term fans of the genre might become disillusioned, turning away from new releases and seeking out more nuanced and less predictable content. Cheap jump scares are designed for short-term impact. They provide an immediate jolt of fear, but often leave a little lasting impression. In contrast, well-crafted horror builds atmosphere and tension, creating a sense of unease that lingers long after the movie, game, or show has ended. By relying on jump scares, creators may achieve quick results, but they miss out on the opportunity to truly create memorable horror experiences. These movies built tension slowly, drawing viewers into a terrifying atmosphere that sticks with them long after the credits roll. In contrast, a film filled with cheap jump scares might just be forgotten as soon as the lights come back on. So while jump scares can be an effective tool in horror, their overuse and reliance on cheap tactics can undermine the quality and impact the content. By focusing on manipulating viewers' reflexes rather than building genuine fear, creators risk desensitizing their audience, distracting them from the storytelling, and eroding the trust in the genre. To create truly memorable and effective horror, it's essential to use these jump scares sparingly and in the service of a deeper, more meaningful experience. Thanks for watching.